So this is a video that is definitely a long time coming. I knew it would have to be made at some point, but the death of our sport as we know it is nigh. This is the time where we need to act as a collective. And the collective that I'm speaking of is our little coalition or weightlifting triad, which is myself, Sika Strength, and Weightlifting House. That is Owen and Fitz from Sika Strength and Seb from Weightlifting House, myself. If you guys are not subscribed to me, please subscribe. And then if you are subscribed to me, immediately after this video, subscribe to Sika Strength and subscribe to Weightlifting House. We are trying to build awareness over the situation that is occurring within our sport that could very much mean the demise of the sport insofar as the loss of our Olympic spot. And over the course of this video, what we're going to try to do is explain how we got to this point, why we should not let this sport leave the Olympics or be kicked out of the Olympics, and what you can do to prevent that from happening. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Owen, and then Owen will hand it over to Seb, and then you guys will know where to go to help us out.
Hello to all the Zakites, perhaps even if you get the Deadites reference. I know Fitz doesn't get it. So in weightlifting, we've had basically what can only be described as a organised crime group since approximately 1975. So originally this would have started with a man known as Thomas Ajan. He is a ethnically born Hungarian. He was born in Romania. He became the General Secretary of Weightlifting from 1975 to 2000. And what we saw was literally decades of corruption up until the point where the German documentary came out. Basically what happened in this documentary was a series of extreme cases of corruption, blatant bribery, blackmail, extortion, and accepting doping fines were essentially exposed to the public. Now, all along we had this old guard. These are essentially men and mostly men, who came into positions of power in the IWF and for decades were running a system of just organised crime is the only name for it. If this wasn't happening in sports, it's likely these people would be arrested and sent to jail. But because it's happening in sports, it is just seen as it's not great, is it? So some of this corruption was exposed, and we also had, after London, we had approximately 50 positive retroactive drug tests from weightlifting. So 50. That is probably at least a quarter of all the weightlifters at London. Many of these were medalists. I think in one case, for example, in the 94 kilo class, I think it was something like 10th or 11th place, finally got gold medal once all the retroactive tests were done. So what we've seen over the last few years is a slow exposure of these just massively corrupt motherfuckers, people who just do not care about the sport of weightlifting. Now, over the last few years, it obviously, as it's been exposed to the public, it has no longer been a position where the traditional system can continue. So anyone involved in weightlifting for a long enough time, I think coming up on 10 years now, the system would have been something we just would have accepted. This was how it was run. Everyone knew who the IWF Mafia were. We knew, you'd know Thomas Ajan, you'd see him at international competitions. You'd see just this little goblin of a man, just money falling out of his pockets. And everyone understood that that's basically how things worked in weightlifting. A lot of this corruption was exposed, for example, in the McLaren report. And there was things like $10.5 million worth of money was missing from the IWF accounts. There was one somewhat humorous case where the Albanian Weightlifting Federation drove across borders to drop off $75,000 in cash. Now, Thomas Ajan, for example, receives some Olympic honour in 2010. He was the president of the Weightlifting Federation for something like 20 odd years. No one should be the president of anything for 20 years. He was the general secretary for 25 years. So just absolutely obnoxious levels of criminal injustice. Basically, these men, boomers now at this stage, just kept themselves in this kind of insulated circle of corruption, bribery, self-gratuitous power, and money acquisition. So in this case, their means for controlling power essentially was the doping. So they don't care about weightlifting. They don't care about medals. we sit and we make videos and we talk online and we talk in person, and we're like, oh, clearly this person's still on drugs or doping, and we argue about it. They don't give a fuck about that. They don't care in the least about weightlifting. Thomas Ajan, for example, has like a PhD in physical education. He never once lifted a barbell in his life. He doesn't care about the sport of weightlifting like many of you do. He doesn't understand what it means to train for something, whether that's a 50 kilo snatch or a 150 kilo snatch or a 220 fucking 3 kilo snatch. He does not understand what weightlifting is and what it means to people. So now they're in this position where the IOC essentially has exposed this corruption. Now the IOC obviously haven't exposed their own corruption, but maybe that's a video for another day. But essentially, a series of escalating and more intense threats over the last maybe 2 years. Basically what they've said at certain points was many of these members need to go. They need to be gone. You need to introduce these reforms, these independent recommendations by exterior lawyers and other experts in this field who will make these constitutional changes, and you need to adhere to these or we're going to kick the sport out of the Olympics. Now, they made some changes, they made some things that they were basically forced into doing, but they didn't really change anything. For example, the current president of the IWF, the interim president, Mike Irani, is a representative from the British Weightlifting Federation, but laughably, he is not supported by the British Federation. They think he should retire. They don't agree with him. So there's numerous cases of these people in power, and the IOC finally has said, and they've introduced this for weightlifting. They very clearly said this is because weightlifting forces to do this, where they do not need a vote from the session, that the IOC executive board can remove weightlifting if they have good cause for that. So if they say the IOC, if the IOC says that weightlifting needs to be removed, it does not need to go to a vote, because obviously a sport leaving the Olympics is a huge deal and it's not done very, very lightly. And so weightlifting has proven itself to be such naughty children that the IOC have put something in power, and they literally said a couple of weeks ago, this is because weightlifting is not playing ball. Essentially what happened this year was the IOC told IWF these are reforms you need to make. The IWF said something along the lines of, we don't agree with these. What about these changes? The IOC said, no, that won't do. It's almost laughable if it wasn't so ridiculous that we had people so insulated, so blissfully unaware of what's going on. It's so hard to put into words how ridiculous this whole situation is. Never before have people been in a position of power, and to prove that they have a passion and love for a sport, all they need to do to prove this is to walk the walk, is simply retire. That is one of the stipulations the IOC wants, is they want all the old guard gone. Everybody wants them gone. There isn't a person in weightlifting, unless you're involved in the corruption, who doesn't want new people involved in weightlifting. All they have to do is leave. They just got to get rid of themselves. They got to go, but they won't do that. And so there's a new constitution being voted on the 28th of August, for example. I think Seb's going to talk a little bit about this in this video as well, where they need to make a vote and to essentially say, okay, we are going to vote in this new constitution, which meets all the recommendations the IOC made for us. And by and large, a lot of those members, if they vote in this constitution, this will actually, in fact, make them ineligible for the board via corruption, past doping issues, their countries having doping issues. A lot of this criteria to make it harder for these people to stay on the board. But it's not. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, despite numerous warnings over the last year or so, which again have gotten more intense up into this one, which is the most serious. This is essentially, as I was calling on my Instagram, this is almost a Cuban Missile Crisis of weightlifting. We're at a stage where it's a ridiculous situation. It needs to stop. Everyone needs to do what needs to be done, but it won't happen. It is very unlikely. What most likely will happen is they're in a position where if they go down with the ship, they can keep their even larger levels of corruption exposed and keep their reputation intact. So in their eyes, it's more self-serving for them if they essentially go down with the ship and make sure that their corruption stays uncovered, even though everyone knows exactly what's going on. It's a ridiculous situation. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of the shit show that has been weightlifting.
So for a sport like ours, like weightlifting, the Olympics is the pinnacle. It is the peak of our sport. The Olympics is a way for many countries to assert their dominance on the rest of the world in a fun, friendly kind of way. As soon as weightlifting is withdrawn from the Olympics, countries like Georgia or China or the USA will lose a lot of the funding that the government puts into developing that sport, because why develop it if you can't use it to express your power on the global stage? If member federations lose their funding, then the best of the best will disappear. The IWF as a federation will somewhat lose its importance at that point because athletes won't need it anymore, because the IWF is really only relevant so that athletes can use it as a vehicle to get to the Olympics. The Olympics is the pinnacle. As that then happens, the sport will to some degree disperse. The most talented will either lose funding or interest, and many of them will then just be scouted up by other Olympic sports. It will become to some degree a sport of hobbyists, which is fine. Weightlifting is a hobby for me, it's a hobby for Zach, it's a hobby for Owen, it's a hobby for many of you. We don't necessarily need the Olympics to keep us motivated, but to develop the best and to bring in new talent and to bring in young athletes who look to the Olympics as a goal of theirs. That Olympic status is indeed very important. Without that Olympic status, to some degree, weightlifting will become like powerlifting, where we end up just with lots of different federations. The sport is split, the athletes are dispersed, no one really knows who the best is. You can't compare this person in this federation with this person from that federation. The single IWF federation is in many ways what gives weightlifting its legitimacy, its reputation. If you want to be the best, this is how you demonstrate it. It's through the IWF and eventually through into the Olympics. If you, like me and like Owen and Zach, do not want weightlifting to lose that Olympic status, there's something that you might be able to do that could help at least swing a few votes. If you head to weightliftinghouse.com/save weightlifting, that's all one word, you can use our template that we've written out as an email and find all of the different member federations who will be voting on the reform of the sport and ultimately deciding its fate. If you simply copy and paste that email and email it to various member federations, that may be the impetus, the thing that finally sways some of these swing federations who really hold our destiny in their power. That is weightliftinghouse.com/save weightlifting.